If I figure out how to put a filter over this video, it's gonna be over for you hoes. Hello everybody, welcome back to Meddling in Antiquity. My name is Teray, and today we're going to be discussing Twilight. But not the entirety of Twilight. We're going to be taking this video by video, and I will be uploading episodes as they go up on the podcast that I co-host, Let Me Explain, which I will be linking in the description below. And I will also be making a smaller separate video about the podcast in the podcast section on this channel. However, that is for a later time. Let's talk about Twilight, 2008, directed by Catherine Hardwicke. So I have a lot of thoughts and opinions on Twilight, as I'm sure many people have a lot of thoughts and opinions about Twilight. But we're gonna just kind of break down the three big pros and three big cons that I see, or well, not really three big cons. They're just three pros and three cons that I've really seen in kind of going through and rewatching the movies, and I will kind of be discussing, I mean, not really first impressions because I was like 11, maybe, no, I wasn't even 11 yet. I was pretty young when these movies came out. So I'll just kind of be going over the pros first and then the cons, and then kind of wrap it up in the end. So kind of back to the initial format we had in Serial Scrutiny. Let's get into it. So starting off with the good things about Twilight, the first really good thing would be Catherine Hardwicke at the helm. Because I think we can all agree that seeing as the first film in the franchise was the only one that didn't get nominated for a Razzie, it's probably the best one. And part of the things that make it so good are that despite some of the things that we're going to be discussing in the cons section, the cast was fantastic. As much as people like to rag on Kristen Stewart, part of the reason why her acting is so bland is because of the screenwriting, and we will be talking about that later. But the cast was fantastic. You can't argue with a really good cast. Everybody who played like the Cullens were fantastic. All of the supporting characters, in particular, Christian and Anna as Angela and Jessica, probably two of the most entertaining side characters in the entire franchise. And obviously Billy Burke as Charlie, because this is a Charlie Swan stan household. He deserved so much better than the stress that he had to put up with in the series, dealing with Bella's BS. The soundtrack is another one. I think we can all agree there is not a single miss on the entire Twilight soundtrack. It is 100% incredible, and you cannot argue with the baseball scene. If you try, you will fail, because the baseball scene was one of the best things about the entire first movie. And we all know that. And if Catherine Hardwicke had been allowed to direct the entire franchise, we would have had a baseball scene in every single movie. We were robbed, people. It's time to acknowledge the fact that we were robbed, okay? And I think the biggest pro and a trendsetter was that blue filter. The blue filter set trends. It was a cultural reset, and now it's a filter on Instagram. That blue filter just put, and if you notice, if you pay really close attention, the blue filter is only used when they're in Forks, which I think is a really smart way to film this movie, because it really sets the tone apart for Arizona and Forks, which was a really smart way to play it, because that way we have a way to differentiate between Bella's life before Forks and after, and the kind of aura that exists around Forks, Washington. So that kind of wraps up all the pros, and now let's get into the cons. If I were to sit here and discuss the cons of the entire Twilight franchise, this video would probably get to be at least 45 minutes long. So we're not going to do that. Instead, we're going to take it movie by movie and focus today on the 2008 first film in the series. Now, I think the biggest nitpick we all have is the acting, but you cannot blame the actors for having to work with bad dialogue. So, one of the first major cons that we can really identify with the first Twilight film are Stephenie Meyer's absolutely abysmal screenwriting skills. The dialogue was hokey. It's really irritating. And then there were the two very unnecessary monkey references, especially towards one that a lot of people now, and myself when I went back and reread the books, read to be coded as a black man. And that would be Emmett, when Rosalie calls him her monkey man during the baseball scene, which, putting aside the rest of the cons, that combined with the treatment of the Quileute tribe, extremely worrying and very telling, because Stephenie Meyer is in fact Mormon. And it shows. Turtlenecks and khakis aren't sexy. That's a thing that she wrote to be sexy in the books. That's a whole different video, me talking about the books, but we won't get into that. Instead, we're going to focus on the fact that Stephenie Meyer's kind of weird subliminal racism towards Emmett by throwing in the monkey man line kind of goes hand in hand with what I like to refer to as the Alice issue. Now, most people probably don't know this unless you've actually kind of looked into Catherine Hardwicke post-Twilight. First of all, Catherine Hardwicke, after she made this movie, had a difficult time finding work afterwards because nobody took her seriously as a director, which is stupid because A, Twilight made huge money at the box office, B, it is still such a huge cultural influence today, and C, it was the only film that wasn't nominated for a goddamn Razzie, and she still had a hard time finding work. Now, that aside, the Alice issue is one thing that I think will never fail to piss me off so bad about Stephenie Meyer. Now, in explanation of the Alice issue, Catherine Hardwicke wanted to put more people of color into Twilight from the get-go. So one of her ideas that she came forward with to Stephenie Meyer was making Alice API, making Alice an Asian woman. Stephenie Meyer gave that a hard no. But she kept the black guy as the bad guy, who then turns good at the end. But then when we get into New Moon, I have a whole spiel about Laurent, and it's long, and I will try to cut it down, but that is one thing that also pisses me off. But the fact that Stephenie Meyer gave a hard no to adding at least an iota, a hint, a pinch of any sort of diversity that's not Tyler, who we never see again after the first movie. Fun fact, the one black guy who was in the main character's inner circle of friends does not appear again after the first movie. Tyler gets completely axed. And then we have all the white people until Breaking Dawn. Part 2. There could have been at least a hint of diversity, and Stephenie Meyer gave it a hard pass. And that, I think, really speaks to the kind of person she is, whether or not she's minded her own business since the film's finished, unlike a certain other author we could name. However, I think her silence, but the things that she writes, speak more to her being unwilling to speak about it and kind of unwilling to have to defend it because she feels justified in it than anything else. Because she has given no excuse for why there's so little diversity in the first 4 films in the franchise or in the books. And it's really disappointing because imagine having an Asian Alice. Just think about that. Just think about it. I think about it every time, and now kind of knowing what I know, whenever I think about it, I just see Eva Noblezada from Hadestown as Alice. And honestly, if they remade Twilight but made the Cullens, like, you know, a little more diverse, which is what they should have been in the first place, Eva Noblezada for me would be a shoo-in to play everyone's favorite character that made you kind of gay. But the hard no on diversity kind of really kills me, because that would have been such a beautiful thing to have, is that representation for Asian Pacific Islanders everywhere. I mean, we still would have been missing representation for like Black people, Latinx and Hispanics communities, a lot of other groups, because obviously there's like no outright queer people, unless you count Aro being coded as queer, but we'll get to that in New Moon. And I have some very strong words for Michael Sheen about the laugh. However, I think that just about wraps up the cons of this particular film. So let's get into final thoughts. I know Twilight is problematic. I really do. I fully acknowledge that this series at its root is written by a racist, a dog whistle racist Mormon woman who has no actual concept of asking permission from native tribes before you actually just make shit up about them, who gave hard no's on any editions of people of color, and who kind of just writes not so great for the screen. However, I think the first one, if we're going to compare this absolute shit show of a series, the first movie, I think we can all acknowledge, was by far the highlight of the entire franchise, unless maybe you count Breaking Dawn Part 2, because there were so many people of color in it. But there was something so special about the first film from 2008, and it really did have that indie film feel, which is something that the creator and the other co-host of the Let Me Explain podcast brought up, as she referred to it as an indie movie, and it really is an indie movie. It feels like just this really cool indie vampire film with a kick-ass soundtrack and a really cool blue filter on it. And it made that film so special. And I think that's something that all the rest of the films were missing, is that really individualized, unique take on what this world is supposed to look like, how Bella's reaction to this world is, how Bella makes her way around the world of Twilight. And the first film was so special in the way that it did that, and none of the other films really came up to snuff in regards to the visual aspect of that, unless you count the wigs and the makeup. That's really it. But I think that that's kind of the big thing that's missing, is that feel of individuality, that feel of uniqueness, that the first Twilight movie was not just another big budget franchise movie. It was just it truly felt like an indie film, and that really threw off the rest of the franchise, because none of them could ever match the sheer raw energy that Catherine Hardwicke created in the first movie. So that, I guess, wraps us up for this episode of Serial Scrutiny, and I will see you back in 4 weeks, I think. Well, not total, but the next Serial Scrutiny will be in probably about 4 weeks. But I will see everybody on Wednesday for One-Off Wonders. Bye.